say I really, really loved my work there at Queen Elizabeth. I never, there's not one day that I can say that I didn't enjoy going to work. Patients came for 3 weeks stay. In the beginning, patients came for a 6-week stay, and then it became a 4-week stay, and then it came down to a 3-week stay, and now I think some only stay 2 weeks or a week to try and get the numbers through just so that more people get treated. And of course, if there was anybody that was a real narc, you'd know that you only had them for 3 weeks and then they were gone, or 2 weeks or whatever. So that was, sometimes that did happen, but you could always deal with those people there. They were either in pain or there was some reason why they were like that. Yeah, that was a great time as a charge physio. I had a long time. Pat de Carteret left there in 1990, and then an Englishman came for a short time, and then the assistant charges took over. So it wasn't until 93 that I became charge, and I really shared it with another person who was I was more the, she was the clinical leader, and I suppose I was the other leader that looked after the staff and did all the management things. Went to staff meetings, or heads of department meetings, which were sometimes quite difficult. We had, at one time, we had been through a lot of CEOs, and one came and wanted to join the physios and the OTs up, and some of those meetings were really difficult. And I had a champion in Dr. Jerry Jones, and he was really the only one on my side, and we stuck it out, and we eventually got there. But today, if you go down to Queen Elizabeth, you'll find the physios and the OTs working in the same area. I was lucky at being at Queen Elizabeth. I got to travel quite a lot with being the charge. I went to lots of, in those days they used to have, I think they call them lamps now, but maybe they've gone past that now, but they used to be the charges. And originally, before I came, there used to be what they call the large charges meeting, which is if you had a staff of 10 or more, you're allowed to go to this meeting, which was for the Bay of Plenty. And in my days, I think everybody probably had less than 10, or except for Waikato. And we had these big meetings, and I went all over New Zealand to charge meetings, which was really nice. And with Queen Elizabeth, I was very fortunate to, they were very much into supporting physios and nursing staff with going to conferences, and I've been to many conferences in Australia, all over, to the New Zealand rheumatology conferences. We went nearly every year, and to the Australian rheumatology conferences, which the only part in Australia I hadn't been to a conference was in Perth, and I've since been to make up that deficit. And then one year we had, Jerry Jones was very involved with some Japanese doctors, and he arranged that we do a visit to Japan. And I was lucky enough to go. I went with Dr. Jones, the house manager, and the principal nurse, and myself. 4 of us went, and we had 12 wonderful days in Japan at the expense of the hospital and the Japanese hospital. We were guests of a hospital in Rotorua's sister city, Beppu, and it had a rheumatology unit there consisted of 2 beds, and that's all they had for such a big population. We stayed at the principal nurse and I stayed at the nurses' home. The men, of course, they were a bit more civilised, and they stayed in hotels. But I had a wonderful time. I stayed with one physio, and he had a nurse wife who didn't speak English and a young baby, so I quickly became a Japanese grandmother. I stayed with them for one. We used to stay at the nurses' home, then we went out and had a night out with these physios, and the nurse went and stayed with the nurses. So that was an experience. That one place was very Europeanised, so I sat at a table and chairs and slept in a bed with legs. And then other place I sat on my haunches at a knee-high table and slept on the floor in the same room as the mother, father and the baby. That was all. It was a great experience, really. And we were guests of the city of Beppu, the mayor, and we had a wonderful time. They just showed us around. The mayor couldn't believe that the two women that appeared, myself and the principal nurse, were not the handmaids of the men, that we were actually in our own right allowed to be there. We were the only two women at a great big banquet they had, and there was only the two women and their principal nurse were the only women in this whole room. It was, we were a part of New Zealand Week, and we had representatives from Canterbury Clothing with us. We had Grant Fox and one of the Wetton boys. We had Rotorua District Council representatives. We had a Maori concert party. There were people from McWilliams Wines, people from the lambskin rug, the people that do the lambskin rug. So all in all, that was all because of Queen Elizabeth. It was a great experience, really. I visited the physio department. Of course, that was part of the deal. We went and spent time in the physio department, and it was very poor, really. They had limited facilities, but in the middle of this room, they had this great big, which I now know is, I think it's called a King Kong, a big exercise machine connected to a computer. But they had very little else in the way of treatment gear. They had a pool, and he asked me a question, and it was a very simple question that I would have thought that he would have known. Something to do with exercise. It was something to do with his shoulder, and that surprised me. But that was the way it was in that time. That would have been 1997, I think, when we went to Japan. So I'm very grateful for, that's all part of my physio life, is having ended up there in charge and having those opportunities. So that was something. It came to a stage where I was being asked to do, the other physio left who was helping me, the clinical person, and I was given at a stage where I was being asked to do so much clinical work and so much management that I couldn't do. I was bringing work home at night time. I was bringing home when I had to do the pay things, I'd bring that home at night time. I just really got overloaded with work, and I eventually gave up. I said to them, I just can't do it. You expect me to do all that clinical. They cut down on the staff, and they didn't reduce the clinical load. That they expected me to do, as well as the management. So, and then they brought a man in who did it full time, and he did very little clinical work. And now they have a person who's sort of doing part-time, doing a little bit of management and a bit of clinical. So really, I was really, really hard worked in those days, and I had to do so much. But I enjoyed that, but I couldn't keep up with what they were wanting to do in the way of, future planning for the department and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, it was good days.